Well, I will do a very short intro. I know everybody on this call, so I don't need to introduce myself. But please, if you have not met our wonderful entrepreneur in residence, Mike Traxler, he heads up our defense tech along with a couple others, one that's also on a call today as a listener. So I am not going to go into your impressive resume, Mike. I'm going to let you introduce yourself and then go right to it. I don't know, would you prefer questions throughout, at the end, in the chat? What's your preference there?
I think it's easier to wait till the end. So
Okay.
I'm going to try to get through my material in about 45 minutes, and then that leaves us about 25, 30 minutes for Q&A
Great,
and
great, great, great.
open
So write your
discussion.
questions down. Everybody write your questions down or put them in the chat if you don't want to forget them.
I'm totally offended if you interrupt me, but it's probably easier to wait till the end.
Keep your train of thought. Okay, well, go ahead. The stage is all yours.
Okay, so you can see the slides, right? I hope everybody. Okay, so as Chandler said, I'm a relatively new entrepreneur in residence here at YBI for defense tech. My intent today is to give you an overview on designing and delivering a proof of concept and try to share as much as my personal experience as I can, hopefully make it relevant and give you some tools as you move forward for those of you that are working your own proof of concept. So, oh, making sure my slides work. So really quickly, here's my background. This is more to show you as much what I do have as what I don't have. So context for you. Some of you I can help more than others, and I'm okay talking 1v1 with my own time after this if some of you are interested. So I did 21 years as an Army officer. First 10 years was operational, kind of the stuff you'd think a military guy would do. So I was a tank platoon leader in the 82nd Airborne. I did logistics for about 6 years. And then I went to the Acquisition Corps. So the Acquisition Corps basically manages technology for the complete life cycle. So concept, design, engineering, production, sustainment, and fielding. So the full life cycle. That's my experience. I'll share some stuff later, but I did a lot of proof of concept slash prototyping in the military. So I have a lot of examples from my own personal experience. I retired in 2013. I went to the other side. I worked about 7 years at University of Colorado in a role similar to Chandler's, managing defense related research at University of Colorado Boulder. So tier one research university. They do about $800 million of research a year, maybe 50 million in DoD. And in that role, I was also on the proof of concept board for the state of Colorado. So all the Shark Tank pitches for the state of Colorado, I got to see for about 6, 7 years. So if anything, I've seen a lot of what right looks like, and I've seen a lot of what wrong looks like, and I'll try to share some of that today. And then I have about 6 years in industry. You can see about three startup type companies, and then Ball Aerospace, which got bought out by BAE, so larger aerospace company. So that's it in a nutshell, just for context. So today for the session, my intent was to start with I'll give you my personal take on the ingredients of success for a proof of concept. Then I'll walk through designing an effective POC and delivering an effective POC, talk about some of the pitfalls, and then I have some, I think, good examples of success and failure from my own experience that I'd like to get to as fast as I can, and then we can talk to how that applies to you. I'll say I know there's a lot of people that are smarter in some areas than I do on this call, so and I'm not offended by that. But when we get to the end, we'll be able to share insights and wisdom for the group. So my intent is to give you some tools that are hopefully useful. I think this presentation will be shareable for you guys and will hopefully help you as you move forward. For those who are in the cohort for landing pad, move forward for a proof of concept. So quick definition of a proof of concept. You guys could Google and use AI, come up with your own definition. I thought this was a good one. It's in line with my past experience. So as you can see, small scale preliminary test to demonstrate and validate an idea. And I think the key point is before you spend a ton of resources, money, resources, etc., moving to full scale development. This is a real world example from my experience from 2005. And DoD and the military proof of concept can actually be pretty big and large scale. And this was a successful one. I think Rich Leonardo, who's on, knows this one. This is a counter rocket artillery and mortar system. So what they basically did, this is 2005 in Iraq. They took a Phalanx gun system from the Navy, which is a rapid fire chain gun, 20 millimeter chain gun, integrated it with the fire control system and radar, and basically developed a system that will be able to respond to incoming artillery and mortar coming into the base camp. It was very, very effective. This is a chart just showing what that was. So that's the definition of a proof of concept, just to make sure we're all calibrated. I'm used to the larger scale proof of concept slash rapid prototyping. I would also say I've seen a lot of what you guys are working on. Complexity is not necessarily a function of either size or funding. So your stuff can be every bit as complex as this. So here's I don't know if my screen's blocked here, but hopefully it's okay. Here's my take on critical ingredients of success from my personal experience. Back when I was a government PM in 2010 timeframe, I kind of came up with these 5 categories for any program or a proof of concept, which is really an early stage program, which will ultimately lead into a product and a full scale program. You have to have a requirement, obviously. In case of DOW, a lot of times you have a very formal requirement. In your case, maybe you're working with voice of the customer, you're doing all your discovery, which still happens in defense and larger programs. But bottom line, you need a requirement. You got to have a technical solution. That's you. That could be a product, it could be a service, it could be a change in how you operate. For the purposes of this, I'm focusing on a widget and hardware, which is my background and which I think is most of what you guys are focusing on. You got to have funding. That should be obvious. Could be government contracts. It could be VC. Could be self-funding. It could be a combination. Contract mechanism. That's a huge problem for anybody working in defense. I think I heard one of you talk about it on one of your previous discussions. If you have funding and you have everything else, but you don't have a contract in place to execute that funding, that completely derail your proof of concept or your project. And then you got to have decision authority. A lot of people look at this list and say, yeah, that's obvious. But I'd say go screen what you're doing and validate that you have all 5. You've got to have all 5. You can't have 3 of these to succeed. And I've seen people like Lockheed and Northrop fail because they have a great discussion with the CTO about a great idea. And then they realize later, oh, I don't have the funding and no one has the authority to make this happen. And so make sure you have all the ingredients. Apply innovation throughout. So not just to the technical components, but to how you approach the requirement, how you approach funding, etc. Speed always matters. Now, on the right side, I'm a lifetime program manager, so I'm used to managing cost, schedule, performance. For those of you that are not a PM, that's the iron triangle of PM right there. You're always balancing the scope, which is primarily your technical component of the project, against your time and your cost. So cost, schedule, performance is how the DOW would frame that. And you don't get better, faster, cheaper. You might get 2. I would tell you from my experience, you typically only get 1. W is good about getting really high tech stuff, and it's slower and it costs a lot more. And you can validate me on AI. So just think in the context of your own project, how you're balancing your schedule, your budget, and your cost, and your technical requirements. And then down at the bottom, the final, I'm going to harp on this a little bit later, but the absolute most important ingredient is your team. And I realize you're small now, probably most of you, but you've got to have all the components of your team for success. The recurring theme I see with the POCs that I saw that failed in the state of Colorado was they had a great technical idea, but they didn't have the team to execute it. And that might be you leveraging other people externally, building your team, etc. But that is the most critical ingredient to your success, and probably why you need YBI. So getting into the proof of concept itself, obviously you got to start with your objectives. I know a lot of you have been working on this up to this point in landing pad. I don't need to reiterate a lot of this, but just starting up front, operational need. Can't stress enough how much you need to clearly understand the operational need, the problem you're trying to address before you move downstream at all. And then along with that, what is the capability you provide? Are you providing the full capability? Are you providing a subset of what they need? And are you clear on the value proposition you're meeting? So you've got to be clear on that. I know a lot of you guys have been working a lot on that over the last couple of months. Understand your operational environment and DOW. This is a huge thing. You know, I can build an awesome widget, but then when I put it in the field, it doesn't do well in high heat, extreme cold, sand, dust, and now it's no longer a cool widget. And that's the kind of thing think about in the context of your own project, whatever it is. And then you've got to have measurable criteria. We'll talk more about that. So below, you see an example of a objective statement for an autonomous drone ISR payload. I'm actually working on some consulting on a drone program right now. This is a genericized version of that, but this is a pretty good statement. So you've got an AI enabled, this is a real world system, AI enabled payload to autonomously detect and classify ground vehicles up to 90% accuracy with low latency out to 10 kilometers. So that's a good statement. Just something to think about as you develop your own objectives, which I believe you already have for the most part. So getting to scope. So once you have an objective, you can further define your scope. As you guys know, your scope defines the boundaries of the effort. What I would highlight up there at the top, and I'm going to hit on it a little bit more, is be just as clear what you don't include in your product as what you do include in your product. And that will help you a lot downstream in managing, again, your cost, schedule, and technical aspects of your project. So again, consider your operational environment, your scope. A big thing I'm going to talk about a little bit more later is understand the systems and the interfaces involved with your product, regardless of how small it is. How do you fit into the bigger system, not just technically, but operationally and otherwise? So we'll talk more about that. And then make sure you understand your maturity level and you're clearly communicating that to your customer and you're meeting their value proposition and there's expectation management there. And this clear scope is all clear is important to controlling scope creep. So you don't want to continue to add scope to your project, your proof of concept for a variety of reasons. A lot of it is cost and time, but don't add technical complexity. And I also tie to, as you see there, the test complexity. And we'll talk more about that in a few minutes, but managing is often overlooked. What is required to test and prove out your system before you demonstrate it to someone who actually cares? And then managing the risk that goes with it. So again, managing that triad of schedule, cost, and technical. I like iPhone. I mean, even going back to it as a DoD PM 15 years ago, I used to use iPhone as an example. They're a great example of taking a pretty complex technology and simplifying it to the user and the customer. And I would say, I think you've all heard keep it simple, stupid. It's really keep it simple, smart, because it takes a fair amount of brain power to take a complex system and turn it into a product that people actually want to use. And it also takes the same kind of brain power to pitch it to your stakeholders. So think in terms of how do you simplify your complexity for what is probably a complex solution. And then you see I'm not going to read the ISR payload scope example, but I will highlight again, annotate what it includes and what it doesn't. So as an example there, you've got sensors, you've got onboard AI inferencing, you've got first person view, tactical visualization. But what you don't have is you don't have swarm operations of multi-UAS, you don't have cyber accreditation, you don't have formal qualification testing. So you got to be clear with your sponsor here's what I can do, here's what I can't do, so you don't get in trouble downstream on what you promised to deliver and what you actually deliver. And then, so now you're ready to develop your deliverables. And some of you may already be to this point. But again, I'd highlight keep it simple. So clearly understood, clearly defined problem. You've got a clearly understood, clearly defined solution. And then you measure some results that showed that your sponsor decisively that you're meeting their value proposition. Focus on that second bullet, focus on the operational impact throughout. I've seen that in my past, both as a government PM, as an industry PM, and in academia. You lose sight of your original operational mission and what you're trying to meet for your customer as you get into your design and development. Keep going back to what you promised to deliver and the problem you're trying to solve, and make sure you're still on track. You got to use measurable performance metrics to quantify those outcomes. We'll talk more about that in a minute, give you some guidelines on metrics, demonstrating that realistic environment. And then that last bullet is, to me, critical. I'll show you an example later on, but you have to visualize what you're doing to your customers and your stakeholder. And again, I think that takes a fair amount of brain power to make that case. So give some good visuals, imagery, show that your architecture makes sense, show them that you're meeting the requirement and the need that they're trying to address. So again, the example of the ISR payload, you've got you've got the hardware components you see up there on the right. In this case, you got a drone, you got sensors, you got a controller, etc. You're demonstrating, you got a defined demonstration. In this case, it's vehicle mounted day-night operational test, and you're doing autonomous tracking and detection of moving vehicles. And then you've got clearly quantified results. So prove out your value proposition to your stakeholder. So more on metrics. It's important to get your metrics right. I actually did my master's project way back on metrics when I was at Oregon State. And so these are some pretty good guidelines for success metrics. Again, walking across the top of that slide, you tie them to your objectives. That should be obvious, but make sure they're quantifiable, make sure they're achievable, they're operationally relevant, they're comparable to some baseline so you can measure them for improvement and have an actionable result. So they need to be actionable. I always remember those three. If you remember anything, measurable, meaningful, and manageable. If you have a metric, it should obviously have to be measurable. It has to be meaningful and relevant to what you're doing. And then it has to be manageable. So you have to be able to take that metric, manage it to provide better results. And if you can't do those three things, it's not a metric, it's not viable, don't use it. Down below, I have an example of metrics for the ISR drone scenario. A couple comments here. I would keep the 3 to 5 metrics, not because I'm a simpleton, but because none of us can manage 10 or 15 of anything that's meaningful. And I would say from my experience working some pretty complex programs, if you're on top of your top 3 to 5 metrics, you're going to be okay. So just pick the right metrics, define them clearly, and then be able to show results to your stakeholder. Now, throughout the process, this is a part, allocating your resources and identifying your resources is a problem that I think a lot of people have, not just small startup companies, but Lockheed's and Northrop's are not very good at the resource management part of all this. And, especially I know we've got a lot of engineers and techies online, me included, and we tend to get caught up in design and stuff like that. We forget about the resources required to make sure we have the complete delivery. So a couple things to highlight on resource planning best practices. Minimize complexity. So I highlighted a few things that from my own experience that I think are most critical. Again, understand your core capability, what it is, what it's not, simplify it, keep it, limit your complexity, and laser focus on what you're trying to deliver. Don't get distracted. In the middle there, focus on rapid demonstration. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute on execution, but integration is something that people typically overlook. We get into design and we overlook test and integration, especially in a proof of concept, and that will come back to bite you, both in terms of schedule and in terms of quality of what you're delivering. So so don't forget about test and integration. I'll talk more and give you some examples in a minute. And then resource against risk. So the best, my mind, the best resource against risk is having the right team. So for most of you, have to have a really strong technical team, but I would add to that, you've got to have the rest of the C-suite. Even if it's only one of you, you need the operations component of what you're doing, you need the finance component, marketing, you need the full bench of people to succeed, or you need to leverage people externally to get that. Again, down below, I'm showing you the AI-enabled ISR drone example. A couple things I highlight here. I think this is a pretty comprehensive list of the typical resources you would want. Now, for most of you, and I'm speaking for myself, you would get those first four probably pretty well. Like, I know what people I need, I know the hardware I need, I understand software if it applies to my program, I understand the facilities and the environment that I have. And then I think we start to lose the bubble as you go down that list. So, what are the test assets required to actually prove out what you're doing? Do you have them? Can you prove it out? And can you visualize it? Are you addressing cybersecurity if it's relevant? That can be big in a defense type program. And then are you thinking about logistics and sustainment downstream? That might not matter during your proof of concept. It will matter a lot when you get to scale. And if you haven't thought about till then, you will get derailed. And then you gotta make sure you're clear on how you're collecting your data, how you're analyzing your data, and how you're visualizing it to prove to your stakeholder that your proof of concept is valid and to prove the value in what you're doing. The last one, least favorite of mine, safety and compliance. That's never that fun. Well, that's the stuff that will destroy you if you don't get it right. So make sure you're addressing all of that stuff when you're resourcing your POC. And a lot of this, again, you're thinking not just the proof of concept, but post POC, how do I deliver that product? And you can't wait until you get there to plan it. So risk and mitigation, this is big. I understand, a lot of you're small, you don't have a ton of resources. You can't manage risk like someone like NASA. I mean, I've been involved in stuff where I can have 30 slides just on risk, and that's kind of painful. I'm not a huge fan of that. My intent here is to give you a tool, very simple tool to help you identify, mitigate, and manage risk for your both your proof of concept and then your general product as you move downstream. So I'm assuming most of you have seen a risk matrix, but this is a risk matrix. I've made some modifications based on my own personal experience that I think are useful. So up in the top left, you got the typical matrix. You got what's the likelihood your risk is going to happen? What's the probability will happen? Down on the x-axis, what's the consequence? What's the impact of it happening? You identify again, I'd stick to about 3 to 5 risks. If you have your big rocks solved, the rest generally takes care of itself from my experience. But make sure you've clearly identified your major risks, you understand what they are, you understand how you're gonna mitigate them and address them when and if they arise. I like so you can see on the chart AI target detection, that's high priority for this scenario. In that case, it's high probability, pretty high impact. And I like the trend arrow. It's trending in a bad way. So I've got a pretty good visual if I'm managing, hey, I've got this risk I need to address. And then I can go look at my mitigation strategy, continue to update this. I mean, honestly, you can manage your risk for a pretty major program from one slide, both identify and manage it. So hopefully this is a useful tool. Last comment, I always break down my risk in terms of technical schedule and budget, a common thing and again on the defense side, and that might help you decide who owns it, how it and who it will impact. And obviously these can be multiple. It could be technical and budget, it can be technical schedule. But to me it's useful to categorize these. Now execution, this is getting into this is my world as a lifetime program manager. I'm big on you've got to really understand your schedule, know that it's realistic, know that it's feasible, and be able to execute it. Again, this is intended to be a tool for you to help you manage and identify and lay out your schedule. So I personally like swim lanes. This is definitely good for a major program, but it's good for a smaller program to make sure you've clearly identified the components of your project and how you're going to execute. So, you've got your major milestones up at the top and ending with what is your POC deliverable date, your demo date? What are the major muscle movers leading to that? You got your requirement swim lane, discovery, customer discovery on the front end, leading through formalizing your baseline for design and everything that goes into that. Design, most of you are on top of design. People tend to get that right and they forget the rest. That fourth swim lane to me is huge, and this is a showstopper for a lot of proof of concepts from my experience, big or small. Test and integration. So people do a great job of design. They don't think through how they're going to test, validate, and then integrate into the bigger system. Even if you have a small widget, how does it integrate into the technical system, the operations, business operations of the customer you're supporting? And then again, you got to consider production and logistics, more downstream from your POC. But if you're not walking that through, and that's actually a huge deal with the example that I'm working right now with the drone. If you're not planning on your logistics, your sustainment, your production, when you win your project award for large scales, you will not be ready. Use backwards planning. I don't know how many people have heard of backwards planning. That's a big thing in the military for operational planning, but it's also a common practice in program management. But the idea is you start with the end of your project and you move to the left. So from the end date, what do I need to do as I move towards that to ensure my success and what that forces you to do? So in this case, I'd start at the end, I'd move backwards. I'm getting into my integration as the first thing, and then I move backwards towards design, etc. And what happens is you end up getting to today and you realize I don't have enough time. I need to adjust the schedule, make sure it's more realistic and feasible. So try that where you try your schedule from the end to the beginning and then do it the other way from now till the end. And it will help you better with some cost, with some schedule realism. Make sure you're not shortchanging yourself downstream. Again, integration test is a good example. So as you move towards your path to scale, here's again some good guidelines on components required to scale a POC. A lot of these I think you're on top of from a technical perspective. Typically, there's a couple that I wanted to highlight again from my own experience that seem to be the challenges and the roadblocks from what I've seen. So starting with number one, I can't you can't stress enough, and I think a lot of you have already experienced this up to this point. You need to understand the mission and the value proposition that you have and the problems that you're trying to solve before you go downstream. And if you don't have that clearly defined, clearly understood, the rest will not go well. So take the time up front to get that right. Number three is kind of tied to that, but make sure you understand your architecture. You can visualize it to your customer. And again, think of your integration into the system of systems and into the business itself. I'll talk more about that later. This ties back to number seven, operations. So This is a big showstopper on major defense programs. I guarantee it'll be a challenge for some of you. You build a really cool widget that people like, but you didn't consider how does this fit into the operation, the daily operations of the customer I'm giving it to? How does it impact their business operations? And then have I accounted for number eight, training, and have people bought into it. So make sure you're considering not just this is a cool technical capability. How does it fit into their organization? Have they bought into it? And are they prepared to adopt it? I've seen some great technologies get rejected because people didn't think through the operations part of it and the rest of it. And then number 11, not really my area of expertise. I know a fair amount, but you've got a lot of people at YBI that will help you with make sure you've got your funding in place, whether that's BC, government contract, which I could definitely help with, your own self-funding, a combination of all the above. And I would add to that, understanding the timing of your funding is also critical. So back to this execution schedule I showed you, I'm used to also adding on that my Gantt chart execution timeline, a budget lane at the bottom and showing by month, by quarter, what is my spending to achieve those tasks. So make sure you understand not only the funding you need, but what's the timing of that funding? When do you need it? Typically, your arc is going to be a ramp up and a ramp down for a program in terms of funding. So make sure you're thinking through that too. That's another thing that will bite you. So when you're done with all this, you should have a pretty successful POC and you need to be able to visualize it and pitch it to your customer. I came up with this, I use this AI to come up with this display based on my experience and some input from my past. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to visualize what you're doing, make a strong case to your customer and to your stakeholder. So as you see, this captures everything that we've discussed up to this point. You've got a pretty clear one slide explanation. Here's my mission, here's my objective, scope. Again, you clearly identify what you included, what you did not include. So there's expectation management on what you can deliver. You've got a nice visual on your system, demonstration. I'm used to in the government, you have typically an OV1, you have a operational view of what you're doing. So that demonstration chart is here's a visual on what I did. That might be easier or harder depending on what you're doing, but always good to have a visual for an executive stakeholder. Clearly defined results, and then you show your operational impact, core technologies, key enablers, and ultimately you're painting the picture that we did what you wanted to, we've shown our value proposition, and the next step is to scale to a product slash program of record. I would say, ironically, as a government PM, I did every bit as much salesmanship and business development as you guys do. I just didn't realize it when I was in it. I was said, I don't want to do that. And then I realized, 13 years later, I was doing that when I was in the government. So I can empathize. Common pitfalls. So unclear objectives. Again, start with make sure you clearly understand what you're providing. There's a clear value proposition and your stakeholder agrees to it and is bought into it. And don't go any further until you have that figured out. Wrong success metrics, that's a pretty common problem too. Make sure your success metrics align with the problem you're trying to solve, and they can also be demonstrated and visualized for your customer. Scope creep, that is gigantic. If you look at defense programs, you can go Google and fact check me. Probably 75% of defense major programs that have hundreds of thousands of people working for them on them are behind schedule and over cost. And you don't want to be that guy because you can't afford it at your size. So stay on top of that. Make sure you have the right test to prove out what you're doing and make sure you have the right data quality and the ability to visualize it. We've already talked about that. Lack of stakeholder alignment. I talked a little bit more about that. You could do a class alone on stakeholder alignment. I can't stress enough how important it is to be communicating with your stakeholders from day one to the end consistently. Program management is about 95% communication. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Make sure you're in sync throughout your process. And then no plan behind a POC will go you. And I've seen that in my career. Small innovative business research is a good example of government programs. I've been on all sides of that: government, academia, industry. People come up with a great idea, they get their 150, 250K in funding. They have no plan for how to get to a product or a phase three SIBR, and that's why they don't. So make sure early on you're thinking about what's your end game and how are you going to get there. So now I'm going to finish up with some examples that hopefully give you some more ideas and if anything, maybe gives you an idea what was going on in Iraq in 2005. So I was a science advisor in Iraq in 2005 for about 4 months. And my job was to evaluate prototypes and proof of concepts in a real world environment and a pretty diverse set of geographic locations. So this is from an after action review I gave to the lab when I got back to, I was in New Jersey at the time, a lab with about 3,000 people in it. And this is what I gave to the engineers, part of what I gave to the engineers when I got back. So some examples of proof of concept failure. I say failure in quotations because you're never, I don't think, really fully failing. You know, you learn something from almost everything that you can use in the future and adapt and help you to move forward in a positive way. So almost nothing is a real failure. Maybe that one in the top left. So that one's kind of a joke, but I show this to the engineers. That's an easy example, and you'd be surprised or maybe not surprised how common it is. That flashlight with the X through it is what was given to the soldiers in Iraq. The one on the left is a COTS off the shelf commercial system that provides the same capability and lumens and candelas in a directed beam flashlight. So kind of a dumb example, but it's a easy example of the kinds of stuff that happens. You gave what you thought was a cool technical solution. Operationally, it's not very cool. Down in the bottom left, there's an example of a big problem in Iraq. Temperatures get up to 120, 130 degrees. When you're in a vehicle, they'll get up to 150, typically no air conditioning. So how do you solve that? One of the solutions they came up with was out of the El Paso Police Department. Let's take ice packs, freeze them, insert them into the body armor, and that'll help people cool down. Turns out when you do that, an ice pack becomes hot water in about 15 to 20 minutes, and it's actually heating you. So that's not a valid solution. But as they looked at it, you know, maybe in a static guard tower that doesn't have air conditioning, and I have the ability to freeze it in a cooler and cycle them through, maybe that's a solution. The other way they came up with, and this is out of the Tank and Automotive Lab in Detroit, was they developed a cooling system that integrated into the vest, hooked up the hoses into the vehicle air conditioning to kind of focus some air on the soldiers. That's an example of a good technical solution that is not operationally very feasible. So great technical solution, but all those hoses and gadgets get in the way of body armor, helmets, weapons, and it's actually a safety hazard. So that's not feasible. However, that can be updated, more seamlessly integrated in the future. That's maybe a viable solution. Up top, you have a explosive ordnance disposal guy, a bomb disposal guy. The problem they had there is operating at night and having the visual to deactivate improvised explosive devices, and they need a high fidelity vision for that, and they need to be hands free. So they've got helmet mounted night vision that doesn't work close in when you're trying to deactivate a bomb. So what they were doing is holding up a flashlight. Now you're not hands free. So a simple solution, this again, simple solution, you mount a flashlight on the top of a Neo D suit. That's actually a pretty good near-term solution. It's not great because you don't want white light in a tactical environment at night. So the ultimate future solution is you want some sort of heads-up display that provides you that fidelity of vision without compromising light security. And then that bottom one, that was added ballistic protection to protect soldiers. Obviously, you've got a Kevlar ballistic shield in the back. You've got a pretty strong ballistic shield in the front. And this was developed by a lab in Maryland. Turns out, that again, cool technical solution, absolutely unfeasible for a dismounted operator. It's heavy, it's bulky, doesn't work with night vision. You can't sight a weapon with it. Not feasible at all for dismounted, but it does have a niche capability. It was good. It turns out in a turret of a vehicle where you can have standoff during the day if you don't have night vision. So it served a purpose there. So an example of a partial solution. And then here's an example of being prepared to adapt. Whatever you do, you're probably going to spiral your technology, learn from your proof of concept either during it or after it, and move on and better your solution. So this is an example again. Engineers developed that system in the top left at Tankett Automotive in Detroit. They delivered it to the brand new Stryker Brigade, brand new vehicle in Iraq in 2005. Those pictures in the middle are within a couple weeks of delivery. These guys were already modifying this system with sheet metal, which, by the way, doesn't do anything for ballistic protection, and trying to fix what the engineers delivered. Now, there are engineering reasons why they designed that turret. There's two sides to the solution. Engineers had reasons why they did what they did. Operators want something else. But the point is, they weren't in sync and they needed to fix it. That solution down at the bottom right, that's a couple years later. Ultimately, as you spin and the operators get together with the engineers, they've got a full-fledged solution that actually makes sense. So a final couple of solutions from my own experience, examples from my own experience, and then we can get to some Q&A. So I was the PM for soldiers, sensors, and lasers for the Army. So I had half of the night vision portfolio. I had the long range part for sensing and targeting. So on the left, you see those are my programs of record. That that one on the left, the 300K system, is called the lightweight laser designator. It's a Northrop Grumman system. It's not lightweight. It's 35 pounds. It's bulky. It's tripod mounted. It's very expensive. It's also very high tech. It's got multiple sensors, day, night. It's got celestial compassing, GPS, ton of technology in that package. So great solution. But here in 2012, people needed some capability soon. So we worked on some proof of concepts to get them out within a matter of months. So on the right side of that slide, we've got that 30K device is a lesser capability on the ones on the left, but had a great user interface. It was a small form factor. It did about 80% of what the user wanted, which is a game changer, and they loved it. That one on the far right, completely out of the box. This is something that Navy SEALs and special operators use. And so this is a pistol format. It's actually a laser with the sight on it. These guys are operating about 500 meters from the target, which is pretty close. And for them, that is a great piece of kit. Super lightweight, easy to use, has nothing close to the capability as the other ones, but it meets their requirements. So an example is something that they discovered. It's game changing, nothing like the original requirement, but it meets a big operational need in a niche area. So this is an example where these were cheaper, they were faster, and debatably better from an operational perspective. Technically not better and not the long-term solution, but pretty good in this case. And then my final example, I fielded counter ID systems in Iraq in 2007, so improvised explosive devices. So this system was an example of a low tech system that was actually complex programmatically, which some of you guys can probably relate to. So this is we took an existing mine roller and adapted it to Humvees and multiple vehicles in Iraq. And the idea was to provide downward pressure to detonate pressure plate activated IEDs and provide standoff to protect the soldiers and the crew. I know decisively this was successful. I can't show you pictures because they're classified, but this program was a success. What was challenging about this program, though, is as you see the timeline, we went from the time we got funding and a contract in place in December, we we tested, integrated, did a portion of design, produced, and then fielded these systems in Iraq in a 6 month timeline. This includes I was located in New Jersey. We were working in DC. The test assets were in Detroit, and the production was by a UK company, Pearson Manufacturing, in the UK. And so a lot of moving pieces to integrate to make this happen. So this is an example where it's not technically complex, but a lot of moving pieces and very complex in other ways. So, and I know this is some of what you guys will deal with. So this is why you need to have a clearly understood and defined schedule. So just to wrap things up, and then we'll open up for Q&A. I can't stress enough, you got to have the right team with the right mix. Again, when I reviewed the POCs for the state of Colorado for about the 6 or 7 years, what I kind of concluded around year 5, the number one ingredient to whether they were going to succeed was, do they have the right team? I mean, you can't just have a techie. You've got to have someone who understands how to execute and operate. You have to have people who understand finance and marketing. You basically have to have that C-suite and understanding that you may be of an army of one. You've got to at least surround yourself and augment yourself with people that make up for your weaknesses. And that's just as true for a Northrop or a Lockheed. You see the same thing. Make sure you've got the full complement of people and don't surround yourself by a bunch of people that agree with you. You get the same bad answer you come up with. Have a tailorable, flexible solution. This is huge in DOW. It's huge anywhere. Go back to iPhone. Limit the complexity. Modular open system architecture has been a thing in defense for at least 15 years. It's definitely a thing when you're buying your own personal item. You want something that's easy to modify, upgrade, tailor. I honestly don't want to deal with IP and a lot of complexity in improving my system downstream. So think through that and think through your business case in terms of MOSA and complexity. Have the strong execution plan. We talked about that. Realistic, feasible schedule, manageable risk. Stakeholder management, that's internal too. So this is also derails you. I know you guys are small, most of you, but if you're not managing your internal team, that could be just as bad as not managing your external stakeholders. So have your engineers bought in? Do they understand what you're doing? Same across the board, business, operations. Are you guys in sync? Are you on board and you're all messaging the same thing? And then at the end of the day, you'll have a compelling business case. I like the idea of under promise, over deliver. Like, come to a solution that has a really strong business case for your stakeholder, but then be prepared in the back of your mind to over deliver on that. Don't promise it up front, but be ready to do that. And then within your scope, of course. And then again, balance that triad. I'd always say when I was a government PM, if you couldn't convince me that what you were doing was technically feasible, that the schedule made sense, and that I could actually afford it, I wasn't interested. So fundamentally, you've got to convince your stakeholder, I can do technically what I say I can do. My budget makes sense, and I can do it in a reasonable amount of time. So think of it in terms of that. And if you present and deliver that way, they'll be happy. So I probably took a little bit too long,
And that was great, Mike.
but I'm ready for Q&A and open discussion. I know a lot of you guys have some really good insights here.
All right, great. Yeah, just come off of mute. Ask any questions you have.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Sheila, and I currently have a prototype that's at roughly TRL 6 or 7. And I'm just curious because there's been some instances where we've been asked, what's your budget to further advance this is really a broad question. Sometimes there's a actual budget that we need to fit into, and that's an easier question to answer. And sometimes this is an open-ended question. So in the times when it's an open-ended question, I'm just curious, like what is a realistic budget that the Department of War would actually put towards taking something from TRL 6 to 7 and further advancing a prototype that is a safe amount to maybe stay under when we're just asked that in a broad sense.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of context that I know Rich Leonardo is on, probably has some perspective, but I guess the short answer for me is TRL 6 is actually pretty high. Like I'm used to, I spent about half my acquisition career in the lab side. So when you get to TRL 6, I have a reasonable amount of confidence you can get somewhere, and I would be willing to spend some real money to find out. And so I think the short answer is, yeah, I think if you've proven TRL 6 and they feel confident in it and they like what you're doing, they'd be willing to spend some significant money to get to towards TRL 9 and even 7 and 8. So there's context on what specifically are you doing, what where is it on the priority of Department of War? So all those things matter. Like if you're doing UAS, this drone dominance program is $1 billion program. They can throw some serious money on it, not blink an eye. As an example, as a government PM, I had about $20 million in discretionary funding for sensors and lasers to support my program. So I could go out and do a letter contract for 300, 500K, maybe $1 million just to find out if it was a good idea. And in the context of my $300 to $500 million portfolio, that wasn't a lot of money. So I saw that a lot at CU Boulder, where faculty members would get uptight because like, well, we need to be really accurate, and this is 135K and not 150K. I'm like, that's a rounding error to your customer. So be situationally aware. Like, don't be greedy and be accurate with your proposals. But there's money if you're at TRL 6 and they like what you're doing and it fits in their priorities. Don't be afraid to ask for the money to get there, but also make sure you've done the analysis on what it legitimately takes to get from TRL 6 to 9, because that can be a pretty big stretch. Because now you're getting into qualification testing and all the bureaucracy that nobody likes. I don't know if
Thank
that
you.
answers your question.
Yeah, for us, we do like digital battlefields and augmented reality. So there's okay, we can create this very specific scope of work. Or there's okay, so we've partnered with a heads-up display company and then we need to be on a secure networking and how do those things work together? And so there's sort of like the broad answer and then the just the isolated focus on our company answer and then the building this into a platform. So like you said earlier,
Yeah.
they can modify it themselves and make it more scalable. And then there's okay, let's pop this up for one training instance answer to this. I know that's not what everybody wants to hear when they're
Yeah.
having me break down budgets. And so it's been really confusing for me because I'm having to spit out these budgets like 2 a week. And then I'm like, I don't know if that was the dollar amount they wanted to see.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying, and you brought up another thing that's important, like that I talked about earlier, integrating into the bigger system. So, and that's true of things like AI, VR, or AR, VR, any software related stuff. If you're trying to implement it across DoD or even a subset, how do you fit into what they already have? And so that's another example of you might have great technology, but if it doesn't seamlessly integrate into what they already have,
Hmm.
it's a tough business proposition. So you have to make the case that you can easily integrate this into the systems you already have, which requires you to understand what they have, how you would integrate, how you make the value proposition that I can make your life easier by upgrading your systems with my capability. And that's kind of a longer discussion, but that's part of what all of you have to kind of think through is, again, fit into the bigger system, and not just technically, but operationally. Like they may love it, but how easy is it to fit into how they operate now and the systems they already have? I don't mind talking to you offline, Sheila, too. I think I said that up front. I don't mind taking an hour of my own time to just talk through and give you some insights on from my take on where you can go with some of this.
Okay, yeah, I really like that. Thank you.
Sure. I don't
Mike,
know if you had anything to add, Rich.
just what, Mike, one comment. I think your slides provide all of us a framework for this as we go into TRL, MRL, and that's great. What's interesting for the group and myself is to think about the most important part that you mentioned, personnel. Can you imagine hiring folks, team, from a holistic viewpoint of what Mike listed here on going from the beginning to the end in your POC? So a lot of times when I hire, it was more, I guess, transactional. I need somebody to do X, right? And so then in my mind, as the small business manager, I'm not filling out all the slots based on the capability to bring product to market. I'm filling them out based on my need right now. I need a social media, or I need an engineer, or I need a logistician. So I think what Mike's framework is, it's not only good for doing what he's trying to educate us on today, but also for consideration of the most important point, how you hire a fully capable team to execute the mission as you move downstream and mature your TRL, MRL. So that's the comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I
Yeah,
can't
thank you,
stress that
Rich.
enough.
Rich is another one of our EIRs, if you all came on late, and so is Mike Breslin. Hey, Mike. All of our defense guys in one place. So, anyone else have questions? Please, we have about 13 minutes.
Yeah, I've got a quick question. First of all, thanks, Mike, for the presentation. It was very helpful. I
Yeah,
had a
sure.
question on working with the contractors directly. So we gave a briefing a while back to a group out of the Navy, but because we're a component supplier, they were like, yeah, this would definitely be useful, but you need to be talking to, the OEMs that we contract to, not us directly. And I hear a lot of kind of DOW figures talking about speed a lot lately, how can we move faster and faster? And so my question is how the requirements that you see like in deployment, like you were talking about with soldiers, for example, how well did those kind of motivations actually translate on the contractor side when you're trying to sell, components to those companies?
Yeah, I mean that's a loaded question, long answer, but sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But this goes back to, and I know part of what you're doing was in sensors and laser space, right? And so that's my expertise, or it was a while ago.
Hmm.
And we can have an offline conversation if you want.
Sure,
But
thank you.
but that goes back to like understanding up front, what are you providing? What differentiates you from everybody else in terms of whatever laser stuff you're providing,
Hmm.
and why do they want it? And understanding that up front. And if that's the case, then you can get to the what OEM wants it. So you might have to do some more discovery on talking to, and I can actually help you with some of this, talking to some of the labs that are developing the technology. A lot of the government guys that, Rich and I and maybe Mike have had the benefit of value of being on the government side. I get to see everyone.
Hmm.
And I don't even have to be that smart. After a while, you've seen 10 or 15 competitors and you can tell who's good and who's not. And
Hmm.
so they have the advantage of seeing you and the five people competing with you. So when you talk to them, and if they're honest with you, they'll give you some pretty good constructive feedback on, here's where you're on track, here's where you're off track, here's what we really need from a technical perspective. But then you're balancing what makes DoD hard is you want to talk to the real users that are actually using the systems.
Hmm.
Then you want to talk to the techies that are building the systems, and they don't always talk. So at some level, you have to help deconflict that. and it's a complex web, but you want to talk to the people that own and understand requirements. You want to talk to the people that are developing the technology, and you want to talk to the actual users that probably know more than anybody what they actually need. And then, after you have that figured out, then you have a business case for your OEM. And that's a competitive space, Elijah. Like I
Mhm.
and I saw some of your presentations previously. That's a competitive space, so you got to really figure out what your niche is and where you fit in.
Makes sense.
Again, I can talk with you offline if you want more insight on maybe who you can talk to and help you scope what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I'll take you up on that. Thank you.
Anyone else?
I don't
Yes,
really have a
I'm sorry.
Oh, go
question.
ahead,
This is
Marlene.
Lauren. Hello. I just thought that this presentation was awesome, and I really appreciate being able to attend, and it's definitely very helpful for me. And so I just wanted to say that. So anyway, I don't really have a question. I think he covered a whole lot of things that I've been looking at. And I have a program management background, so so I'm looking at everything, which is kind of overwhelming. But you just confirmed I'm doing it. I'm doing the right things. It's just, when you're a team of one,
Yeah,
that staffing problem that you mentioned is definitely, well, not necessarily a problem, but that staffing component is definitely very important. And I know that, and that's
yeah.
really an area that I'm trying to focus on more now. So, but thank you so much for the presentation.
Thanks, Marlene. I appreciate it. You're one of my people.
Hey,
But
Mike.
I and I can't I would just reiterate, like I understand, like I showed you some big complex programs that I've worked on, but like I said, complexity isn't a function of either size or dollar value. What you're doing is every bit as complex as what I showed, just in a different way. So don't let's everything I showed is definitely relevant to what you're doing.
Hey,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Chandler, are these presentations going to be available in some knowledge wall or
Yes, I'm going
website?
to put them on the YBI Engine page.
Awesome.
Yep. And we have one more left about NIST with Paul Witherell next week. So I'll be sending that out as well. Any other questions, guys? Mike, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I don't want to end early if you all think you have anything
Yes,
else.
I would like to ask one more question if I may. And by the way, thank you very much for the great presentation and the framework as well. Very interesting. I found particularly interesting the aspect, the recommendation on proper planning for what's coming next after the POC. And I was wondering whether you could share some more elaborated recommendations, suggestions, or like best practices in that regard.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it. I mean, there's a lot behind that, but if you go back to for me, I like Marlene. I'm a PM by trade. I'm a program manager by trade. And for me, the root of it is this, like if I clearly lay out my plan and my schedule and I've properly addressed every component of what's required to deliver my end state, I will be okay. So I spend a lot of time on this, you know, what are all the key components required to deliver what I'm delivering? And there's a lot behind this. You could do another tier on each one of these swim lanes. But if you really understand all the components of what you're doing, how they fit together, and then, I know you guys are all like Army of One, but I would want in a big program, I have someone that owns each of these swim lanes. Someone's managing requirements, someone's on top of design, someone's on top of test. And so, really understanding your timeline, all the key components, who owns it. I also, at the end, I had another one in the end here. Here's a responsibility matrix. So, another useful tool, like for all those key activities, who owns it? and who's managing it. So this is another useful tool. This all totally gets into program management. Marlene can probably relate if you're PMP certified or something like that. I think it's really, I can't stress enough for me understanding all the components of what you're doing and how they fit together. And then for me being able to visualize it. So for me, I could manage one of my biggest tools, like in this case, I can manage this program from this chart. Now there's a lot of detail behind it. But for me, as if I'm the PM with, I had 50 or so people directly reporting for me, I could manage my program with this chart. Now there's a lot of people doing a lot behind this. I don't know if that helps you, but I can't stress enough like getting, and this is one example. There's many different ways you can visualize your calendar. There's different tools you can use, but understanding all the components of your schedule, how they fit together is critical.
Hey, Mike,
Yeah, thank you very much.
is my audio working?
Yeah,
So just bounce something off you, and this is something that I've found many times. You know, this is a very DoD chart, right? It's a format we've seen in all our DoD programs. Love it, grade it to the army of one you're talking about, to the entrepreneurs, so the small businesses. This is intimidating. So the gut instinct
yeah.
is to roll over to the tool you're more comfortable with and more familiar with, which is great for internal work. But one of the things we've found over the years is pass the easy button, right? If I can speak their language and their format with their terms, they have to think a lot less, they being the government people. The less they got to think, the more they apt they are to put you at the top of a stack. You've got two competing technical solutions, and one of them is formatted. I can understand everything they presented in my language versus their language. I'm going to be apt to go for where I'm comfortable. So I know Rich and I have drilled this into a lot of our clients over the years, but give them the easy, whenever possible, give the government people the easy button, speak their language, use their formats. All these charts are very DoD centric, and it's easy to get intimidated by them, but you got to take the time to learn that language if you want to rise to the top. It will reduce a huge barrier. Thoughts on that? Because we've been living that for a long time. And I've not worked the inside. I've been a defense contractor since I was a kid. But I'm curious if it always seems to have worked for us, but I don't know if we're just lucky. Over.
Can I add
Yeah.
on to that? Just this is ridiculous, but I'm going to ask. Is it DOD always or DOW always? Because I know that can
Well,
really cause a problem.
Dep-
now it's DOW because they changed it. We're just used to DOD.
yeah, it
Okay, I'm
depends
just
how,
making because like you hear it both ways, and I'm told that everything has to be DOW now, anything I put out there. Um,
Officially, it's DOW. Who
okay.
knows? Maybe
yeah,
it'll change back. Same
Okay.
thing.
it depends how old you are. When you've been doing this for
Yeah.
30 plus years, it's DOD.
But they like it could hurt you for if you don't do
So
it correctly, is what I understand.
So I agree with everything you just said, Mike. So I didn't say it. So for me, I'm a visual. So part of what I'm showing you on this slide is like Mike said, this isn't just for me. For me, I always struggled as a PM. I want a tool where I can manage it, but I can also present it to hire. Like so I understand what I'm doing, but I also need to be able to show it to someone higher. So this is actually a pretty simplistic thing. You can go and use some pretty high-end software to do a really complex schedule resource loading. But and you can do this in Excel if you want. You can do a very simple thing with Excel to do swim lanes. But to Mike's point, I think if you can do it to the fidelity where you can manage it, but also have a version without because you don't have a ton of time that you can easily show it externally and give people confidence that you know what you're doing. As a government PM, and if you were trying to market to me, again, like if I don't believe that you're on top of your schedule and it makes sense, and if I don't believe your budget makes sense, and if I don't believe your technical solution makes sense, I'm not talking to you. And it doesn't take too long to figure it out. So flip that around. If you come in and you have a schedule that makes sense and it's clearly laid out, you've hit all the components, and the same with your budget, then your sponsor will have confidence. And to your earlier point, Sheila, they'll be ready to spend some money if they have confidence that you know what you're doing.
Yeah, one thing to add to that group yesterday, the Apex Accelerator for YSU had a government GSA contracting officer visit And he mentioned something that yesterday I think we all need to keep in mind. And Mr. Breslin and I had discussed this with Sibber Sitter winners. He said they are so short-handed as contracting officers right now that anything you could do to help them, i.e., when they send you a note, you need to be on it. When you interact with them, you need to be concise. And it's fine to interact with them, they welcome that. But don't get into a selling session with them at times when they are busy trying to review other things. He says they are very contracting in general, very short. That's the long lead item between you getting money and others getting money and not. So I think that's a critical point from that gentleman yesterday for us to share. Over.
Yeah, and to add to that, I have a lot of, this is DoD centric because a lot of my personal examples are DoD, but I have a lot of experience outside of DoD, and the principles are the same. You want to pitch at a high, clearly, concisely, at the appropriate level of who you're presenting to, and it's typically an executive level person. They don't need to know all the details of what's going on inside the black box of your solution. They need to know the business case. They need to have confidence again that you're on top of all the components of what you're doing, and then you can tailor it to depending on who you're talking to. But it's not that much different in industry. Speak to the level that you're presenting to, especially when you're doing that pitch. They don't want to see the details of how you solved your technical problem. They want to see more. Is it feasible? Enough to know it's feasible. What's the impact? What's the cost? And why do I want it?
No
So,
different than pitching in front of VCs.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. What do they care about?
but fun life hack for that, and I'll give you by example. So we've been talking to the Fuse, which are the guys that run SBIR. Turns out the Fuse now reports into the pit. I can't keep track of this stuff. It's changing hourly. I have no idea who the pit was. They asked us for a briefing. I have no idea what level to brief them at. First thing I did is went online, Googled as many pit briefings as I could find, understood the level they communicate, what their style of communication, what their briefings look like. Took my entire Fuse briefing, redid it because it no longer matched. The Fuse is at a much lower level, much more granular. Pit is more about benefit, not about technology. So with the internet at hand, it's like, how do I know who I'm briefing? I spend probably as much time researching audiences as I do putting a briefing together.
Yeah.
I know my technology. I can do that in my sleep. It's literally understanding that audience. But with the internet, I mean, just Google AI, Chat GPT, whatever you're using, pull down how they're used to communicating and mimic it. You'll hit them at the right level because it's tough. VCs are easy. They're all the same. Yeah, these guys are not. Every level in the DoD is entirely different, and their hot button is going to be different. And to your point, Mike, you come in with a technical briefing for a programmatic audience, they're sleeping, they're checking their phones, and you probably just lost. Over.
And yeah, ultimately, and I don't think it's that much different, whether it's DoD, industry, small business, make sure you know who you're talking to. And ultimately, you want to talk to the decision maker. It goes back to those 5 components. I can talk to a cool techie that loves my idea, but if they don't have the ability to make a decision and fund it, that's not who you need to be talking to. Talk to the person that can make a decision. And it's typically somewhere in the middle of the organization, in my opinion. You don't talk to the CEO, you don't talk to the ground level. Like in the military, it's at the lieutenant colonel level. Those are the PMs making decisions, spending money. You could talk to my boss when I was a lieutenant colonel PM, but he would have said, "That's a great idea. Go talk to Mike." So make sure you know who you're talking at, what level they are, what authority they have. Mike's right. Like one advantage you have over us old guys, you guys are more tech savvy, but you have AI and use AI because now that is a legitimate game changer in terms of intelligence and understanding what's going on, who to talk to, how things work.